A billionaire is found dead inside his own bedroom. The door is locked from the inside, the windows are sealed, and there is no murder weapon anywhere in the room. This timeline reveals an anomaly. The body was discovered at 3:17 a.m., but examiners established his heart stopped at 1:08 a.m. During that 2-hour vacuum, someone remained in the room to manipulate the crime scene and construct a false narrative. To solve a locked room murder like this, we have to look past the physical escape. We need to figure out why the killer went through the trouble of making the world believe the death happened at 3:17. All of this happens at Blackwood House, a remote estate on the Atlantic coast. A violent storm has washed out the only access road, completely severing the property from the mainland. Nobody can enter and nobody can leave. The owner of the estate is Edward Blackwood. He operates his business and his family on a single, ruthless principle. He collects the darkest secrets of the people around him and uses that information as absolute leverage to control their lives. Among the 8 guests trapped inside are Peter Grant, the retired detective who led the original fire investigation 22 years ago, and Margaret Vale, a quiet historian who seems to have no official connection to the family. Every person at this table has a distinct, well-documented motive to want Edward dead. During dinner, Edward issues a final ultimatum. He announces that the official accident report for the fatal fire at the house is a lie, and at midnight he plans to expose exactly who was responsible for the cover-up. He makes sure to point out that this secret directly implicates his own estranged daughter, Sarah. The person who burned to death in 2002 was her mother, and as Edward speaks, Margaret Vale doesn't look at the host. She keeps her eyes fixed on Sarah. He designed this gathering as a psychological trap. By backing his victims into a corner with an impending deadline, he made a violent retaliation inevitable. At exactly midnight, the estate's power grid fails. The mansion is thrown into total darkness, causing the trapped guests to panic and scatter. By the time the emergency generators kick on, Edward is missing. The ensuing search leads the group to his private quarters, where they break down his bedroom door and find his body on the floor. An immediate examination of the room rules out physical entry. The window frames are securely sealed from the inside, the heavy door hinges are completely unbroken, and his untouched food and water eliminate the possibility of ingested poison. Because the room is strictly impenetrable from the outside, investigators have to question the architectural physics of the space itself to understand how the killer reached him. The physical debris in the room suggests a struggle occurred much later than the actual death. A medical syringe is missing from a doctor's bag downstairs, and Edward's shattered pocket watch rests on the floor, stopped exactly at 3:17. But the killer left a fatal flaw in their staging. The grandfather clock standing in the corner of the room is still ticking perfectly. The broken watch is a deliberate plant, placed there to fake the time of death. Once a lethal injection is ruled out, there is only one method capable of crossing a locked threshold without breaking the seal: an airborne poison that the victim breathes in. The investigation pivots when Sarah inspects a forgotten crack in the corridor wall and discovers an old hidden servant passage sitting completely outside the main floor plan. As you can see by the glowing line on this wireframe cutaway, a long-forgotten ventilation system runs straight from that servant's passage into Edward's bedroom. Someone retrofitted it with a modern gas dispersal device, aiming it directly at the space where he slept. The killer executed the murder by weaponizing the hidden anatomy of the house itself. This timeline reveals the true sequence. At exactly 1:08 a.m., the killer flooded the room with gas. Hours later, Detective Grant entered as an accomplice to protect his career. He broke the watch and planted the syringe, staging the 3:17 alibi. Deep inside that ventilation shaft, Sarah finds an old dust-covered diary. It contains a written confession proving that Margaret Vale was a witness 22 years ago, and she watched Edward intentionally set the fatal fire. The locked room was a theatrical distraction, engineered to buy Peter enough time to permanently bury Edward's ultimate secret before authorities could interfere. The diary and Margaret's strange fixation on Sarah throughout the night finally make sense. The historian is actually Sarah's mother. She survived the fire and lived in hiding for over 2 decades to escape Edward's reach. Margaret executed the murder as a desperate preemptive strike. She knew Edward was going to manipulate the story of the fire to frame himself as the victim, and she needed to stop him from destroying her daughter's life with his lies. Edward spent his entire life obsessing over how to control his family and his associates through their secrets. In the end, the extreme pressure he applied to the people around him engineered his own inescapable execution.